Have you ever noticed that history calls a woman evil right after she stops being useful? Tonight, we're looking at medieval queens, the ones chroniclers labeled as scheming, ruthless, and dangerous. The kind who didn't just wear a crown. They wielded it. But here's what the old texts don't always say. What were they fighting for? Who pushed them first? And why do we remember their revenge, but forget the reasons? Stay with me, because by the end of this video, you may stop asking were they evil, and start asking what would you have done? If that sounds like your kind of history, hit like and subscribe right now. Let's walk into the shadows together. What kind of queen waits nearly a decade to destroy a king? Not the loud one. Not the one who throws tantrums or threatens openly. No, the most dangerous queen is the one who learns to smile while the kingdom burns around her husband's feet. Isabella of France arrived in England as a teenager, elegant, French, and politically valuable. She expected respect. She expected partnership. Instead, she discovered that her husband, Edward II, preferred the company of his male favorites to his own queen. He ignored her in public, humiliated her in private, and somehow managed to offend every powerful noble in the realm while acting surprised when they turned against him. Edward wasn't cruel in a theatrical sense. He was worse. He was embarrassing. And Isabella watched. She watched him burn alliances like cheap candles. She watched him hand land and titles to men who sneered at her. She listened to the whispers of barons who felt betrayed, of bishops who felt used, of soldiers who felt forgotten. And she said nothing. Not because she was weak. Because she was taking notes. For years, she played the role of the patient, wronged wife. She wrote letters to her family in France. She cultivated quiet friendships with the very men her husband alienated. She never plotted loudly. She never raised a dagger. She simply waited for Edward to destroy himself. And he did. When she finally traveled to France on what appeared to be diplomatic business, she simply refused to return. From across the Channel, she raised an army, allied with the exiled noble Roger Mortimer, and prepared to take back her life. Edward's support evaporated faster than his dignity. Nobles defected. Cities opened their gates. The king fled like a man who had just realized consequences exist. He was captured, deposed, and later died in prison under circumstances that remain politely unclear. History called her the she-wolf of France, meant as an insult. But wolves don't scream. They wait. And Isabella's scheme was so clean, so quiet, so terrifyingly patient, that even now we aren't sure who struck the final blow. She didn't need poison or daggers. She needed time, silence, and a husband foolish enough to give her both. Which raises an unsettling question. If patience is the deadliest weapon, what other queens sharpened it in the shadows? Let us turn now to a woman who did not wait. A woman who grabbed chaos by the throat and called it motherhood. Margaret of Anjou. Margaret of Anjou. She did not plan on becoming England's nightmare. She married King Henry VI expecting to be a queen, not the chief executive of a collapsing kingdom. But her husband came with two problems. First, he was deeply pious, which sounds lovely until you realize he trusted everyone. Second, he was spectacularly indecisive and periodically slipped out of reality entirely. Someone had to run the country. Margaret stepped in, not gently, not temporarily, but as though the crown had always been hers to wield. And when her son was born, something shifted inside her. She was no longer just a queen holding a kingdom together. She was a mother protecting a future. That is when the whispers started. That is when the scheming became ruthless. Her goal was brutally simple. Secure the throne for her son. And if that meant plunging England into a multi-decade civil war that would shred the nobility like old parchment, then so be it. The Wars of the Roses were not a tragic accident. They were Margaret's answer to anyone who dared push her aside. Unlike Isabella, who ruled through silence and patience, Margaret ruled through noise and steel. She raised armies herself. She ordered executions without hesitation. She removed enemies with a speed that made hardened nobles check their doors at night. Anyone who questioned her authority quickly learned that mercy was not part of her vocabulary. Loyalty was optional. Obedience was not. Chroniclers called her monstrous, unnatural, a woman who had forgotten her place. But here is the uncomfortable question they never answered. When a male king executes rivals, history calls it justice. When Margaret did the same, history called it evil. Was it the act itself they hated, or simply the woman performing it? She terrified the English nobility, which was impressive considering those same nobles spent their free time inventing new ways to betray each other. Her enemies painted her as bloodthirsty. Her supporters saw her as the only adult in a room full of tantrums. Either way, she refused to apologize for surviving. Her downfall came not from incompetence, but from exhaustion. Decades of war hollowed out the kingdom. Allies turned. Fortunes shifted. Her son was killed before her eyes, and she was exiled, alive but defeated. Yet even in defeat, she left behind a chilling lesson. Chaos does not need to be created. It only needs to be aimed. Margaret grabbed chaos by the throat and pointed it at anyone who threatened her child. That is not madness. That is something far more disturbing. It is a mother who decided that the world would burn before her son would fall. Which brings us to a different kind of evil. Not a queen who fought openly, but two queens who turned an entire kingdom into their personal blood feud. Brunhilda and Fredegund. The feud that broke Francia. Brunhilda and Fredegund. The feud that broke Francia. Imagine two queens who never held a sword to each other's throat but spent decades finding more creative ways to draw blood. Brunhilda was a Visigothic princess, educated, patient, and terrifyingly legal. When her husband was murdered, she did not retreat into mourning. She leaned forward hard, ruling as regent, manipulating courts, and treating the law like a weapon with excellent paperwork. Her enemies did not simply die. They were tried, convicted, and erased with such careful formality that even the victims' families had to admit everything looked perfectly official. That was Brunhilda's genius. She made murder boring. Then there was Fredegund. She began as a servant, which meant she learned early how power really worked, who whispered, who listened, and who mysteriously vanished after dinner. She became the king's mistress, then allegedly helped arrange the death of his queen, then took the crown for herself. No paperwork. No trials. Just ambition with casualties. Where Brunhilda ruled through endurance, Fredegund ruled through fear. If someone opposed her, they did not receive a warning. They received a problem. Sometimes poisoned. Sometimes stabbed. Occasionally removed in ways so creative that chroniclers stopped pretending to be shocked. Assassination was not a last resort for Fredegund. It was a scheduling tool. Their rivalry turned Frankish politics into a generational blood feud. Each side blamed the other for murders, rebellions, and collapsing alliances. And the worst part? They were both correct. Brunhilda arranged legal executions. Fredegund arranged convenient accidents. Both women understood something that still makes us uncomfortable. In a world where men made the rules, these two refused to lose to each other or to anyone else. Their hatred was not personal. It was professional. For decades, they sent assassins across borders, corrupted bishops, turned sons against fathers. And through it all, neither could land a final blow. Brunhilda outlived rivals, returned from exile twice, and died old, dragged to death by a horse only after her enemies finally cornered her. Fredegund died peacefully in bed, which considering her resume feels deeply unfair. Their schemes did not end with their deaths. They proved that medieval politics rewarded not the righteous, but the relentless. Two women, one kingdom, and a hatred so deep it became its own form of loyalty. But not every evil queen needed a blood feud. Some simply rearranged Europe so thoroughly that everyone else spent centuries dealing with the consequences. Which brings us to the woman who turned marriage into a weapon of mass influence. Eleanor of Aquitaine. Eleanor of Aquitaine. She never poisoned anyone. She never ordered a public execution. And yet, she may be the most dangerous queen on this list because her scheme was so elegant that no one saw it coming until centuries had passed. Eleanor inherited Aquitaine, one of the richest territories in Europe, which immediately made her the most valuable woman on the continent. She married the King of France, went on crusade, decided she did not like him, and then did something almost unheard of. She got the marriage annulled. Not through tears or tantrums, but through quiet legal pressure and the undeniable fact that she had given him 2 daughters and no sons. Within weeks, she married the future King of England. This was not romance. This was geopolitical speedrunning. As Queen of England, Eleanor discovered that her new husband, Henry II, was ambitious, controlling, and deeply allergic to sharing power. So she did what any reasonable medieval queen would do. She encouraged their sons to rebel against him. Family bonding, but make it civil war. The Great Revolt was a spectacular family argument involving armies, betrayals, and Henry chasing his own children across Europe. Eleanor was captured and imprisoned for 16 years, which sounds harsh until you remember that most medieval prisons did not come with estates, servants, and correspondence privileges. She was grounded, but in a royal way. Even in captivity, she wrote letters, arranged marriages, managed lands, and waited. When Henry died, she emerged from prison like someone returning from a very long vacation with poor reviews. She ruled as regent for her son, Richard the Lionheart, negotiated his ransom when he was captured, and then spent her final years doing something far more sinister than murder. She engineered dynasties. Eleanor married her children into nearly every major European royal house. Her daughters became queens of Castile, Sicily, and Germany. Her sons became kings of England. Her blood flowed through the veins of European nobility for centuries. She did not need to kill her rivals. She simply outlived them, outmarried them, and rearranged the map so thoroughly that her enemies' grandchildren were her own family. Chroniclers accused her of ambition, pride, and meddling. They did not accuse her of incompetence. Even her enemies admitted she was brilliant, which is the medieval equivalent of admitting defeat in slow motion. Eleanor's evil was not cruelty. It was permanence. She did not want to win a battle. She wanted to own the future. And she did. Which raises a final, unsettling thought. If dynasties are the longest game in politics, what other queens played it so well that we never even noticed? Perhaps the quietest evil is the one that looks like legacy.